Good afternoon, and on behalf of Insurance and Pension Denmark, we're very happy to welcome you to this webinar which we're hosting with the think tank Europe. Thank you very much to our three guest speakers joining us today with your perspective on this issue, which is at the top of the agenda everywhere at the moment. The dependency and future independency of Russian gas due to the horrible situation in Ukraine and the war. Our members are already a very big part of the green transition as investors in green solution, and of course we also see a very big role for us and a responsibility in providing this transition which we're facing now. So we're very excited to hear the coming debate and the perspectives this afternoon. And thank you so much to you, Lykke, for guiding us through the afternoon for the coming hour. We're very excited to hear the perspectives on this very interesting issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Per, and a warm welcome also for me. My name is Lykke Fryse, and in 2009, when I became Danmarks Minister of Climate and Energy, I remember that my first sentence was, "Climate and energy is the security and foreign policy of the future." Well, now I could say I told you so, but frankly, of course, I did not in any way predict what would happen would be in this awful situation. Because even when the Cold War was at its coldest, gas was still coming from Russia. And being half German, I obviously also had some trust in the sentence, Wandel durch Handel. But now we are where we are. And after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, one of the most topical questions in Europe at the moment is how can we manage the first winter without Russian energy? Just yesterday, the European Commission presented a master plan on how the EU can reduce demand for Russian gas by 2/3 before the end of this year, a plan which one could label as the EU's declaration of independence. And tomorrow, heads of state and government will meet in Versailles to discuss its swift implementation. Some of this is pretty complicated, and there are many quick solutions floating around also on Twitter and so forth, social media. So we thought it would be a good idea to discuss the overall topic with three leading experts from Denmark, Germany, and Italy. And remember, you can raise your questions in English as we go along. And there you just have to scroll down to the section where it says ask a question. Then I'll try to see if I can get as many questions answered once we've had the various interventions. Let's get started, and I'll introduce our speakers as we go along. And now it's always the very exciting part, whether we then have the first speaker on the line. He's from Denmark, I can see him. It's Professor Brian Vad Mathiesen from Aalborg University. For those of us who follow the Danish debate, you don't need any kind of introduction. Just saw you on television last night, where you sort of answered some of the same questions that you have to respond to now. So basically, Brian, is it possible to cut our over-reliance on Russian gas? How can we stay warm? Or should we hope for a lousy summer and yet another warm winter? Over to you.
Thank you very much for that. We're at a very critical situation. I'm often asked, so what will the consequences be? And I think we just have to frame the situation. It's a matter of critical action here. We're not experiencing war at our doorstep, just outside our borders, but it is in our region of the world. And I think the consequences in Denmark and Europe are small in comparison to what we are seeing the Ukrainians are experiencing. The consequences for us are economic, and I think just to frame it, we can handle an economic crisis. There are many issues at stake, and sort of both technical and resource issues. If we look at the situation, I found it very good that the Commission yesterday came out with this new proposal. We also saw last week the International Energy Agency came out with their proposals, which both, if we look at those proposals, I think it's clear to me that there are no solutions where if the gas is cut, which means that if the gas is cut, there are no solutions that will hinder us from having to shut down European industries. Normally, I divide these measures into three categories. We have sort of acute measures that we need to take, and we have short-term and medium-term term measures. And I'll just try and say a few things about these things, and maybe we can have a little debate about it also. But I think in the acute situation, we need to ensure that Europe can survive a very cold winter, 22-23, and that means that we have to prioritize our resources, and that's what the Commission has a proposal for yesterday. We have to increase our natural gas storages, and we have to make a fuel shift towards coal and oil on the short term. But what they're saying is actually pretty clear. Between the lines, if you read what is there, between the lines, they're saying we can reach 2/3 of a reduction, but 1/3 is still left. And what does that actually mean? It means that we're in trouble if there's no gas left. And it's also clear that this is the pre-consumption here is that we're able to fill our gas storages to a 90% filling level. And that may be hard, especially if Russian gas is shut down right now. So that's the acute situation. And in an acute situation, we need to use heavily energy savings on a massive scale. Every member state in Europe has to make a strategy for energy saving across the board. Also, in countries like Norway, where they have plenty of renewables, we have to, every kilowatt hour we save on transport, electricity, and heat is important. Then we have to have a crisis plan, and that's part of what we saw yesterday. But this crisis plan is actually also on coal and oil. These things are very much connected. And then we have actually another point I tried to make in a white paper I made yesterday together with the Danish Engineering Association is an acute, let's say, check of, do we have enough manpower? Do we need in Europe to stop other projects to be sure that we are able to massively scale up energy efficiency and renewables? Of course, the effect of energy efficiency technically and renewables are a bit more short or medium term, 2 or 3 years further along. But right now, we also need to look at our workforce situation. So that's maybe just to start off a debate here. So that's the acute measures, and then there's other short-term measures with a short-term effect and measures with a medium-term effect. But maybe we can come into that in a minute, Løkke.
Excellent. Thank you very much, particularly with your triple strategy there. I mean that we have acute measures, short-term measures, and then also mid-term measures. And also your very clear point that we are in trouble, because yes, 2/3 sounds extremely impressive. And that was also my sort of reading of when Frans Timmermans, the commissioner, presented it. But as you clearly point out, well, then we have 1/3 left, and what do we do there? So I think that's a very good starting point for our discussion. But before we move into discussion, we obviously now go mentally to Germany. First, we go to Professor Dr. Andreas Löschel. Yes, I can see you. You are from the Ruhr University in Bochum, and you also advise the German government on the Energiewende. Last time we met, it was, and I'm not revealing any secrets, it was much happier times. We met in Berlin. The occasion was the Queen's state visit to Berlin. We were on a panel debating many of these issues. And I also remember that I asked you, I think it was actually after our session, what could imagine would happen with the German nuclear plants. Gibt es da eine Wende? You can now also say we have a change, really a big change with the war, but we also have now a German Minister of Finance, Christian Lindner, who last Sunday it was, after Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, had given his very historic speech, he was sort of on speaking in the German Bundestag, saying that renewable energies are Freiheitsenergien. So I think we are seeing also at least a shift in the narrative compared to when we last met, and that was beginning of November. So over to you, Andreas, and thank you so much for doing this. So what's happening in Germany? How do you look upon the overall situation with regards to this particular topic? Unmute. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure now to continue our discussion from last year. Indeed, under different circumstances, and I'm going to highlight a bit some of the thoughts that are currently here discussed in Germany, given our very high dependence in the energy sector on Russia. So Germany has not only received 55% of its gas from Russia, but also 35% of its oil and 40% of its coal from Russian sources. And currently the German position is that indeed we are going to continue receiving energy from Russia, given the large dependencies. Now, in the last days, the discussion was heating up in Germany, and I think it's fair to say that all the planning now is in Germany for the next 2 winters without energy coming from Russia. Either because the Russians are closing the deliveries, so we have the threat of closing Nord Stream 1, or the German government is putting a moratorium on the reception of energy from Russia, which is demanded now by many in Germany in order not to pay for these aggression that we are seeing at the moment. So in any case, I think we are now thinking how we can cope with a total fallout of Russian energy. And the focus here in Germany is really on gas, because we think that in terms of the oil demand, the oil supplies, as well as in terms of the coal supplies, taking also into account that Germany has a relatively broad brown coal base, we are less vulnerable. So the discussions are about gas, and similar to the European exercise, now the discussion is how can we actually adjust to this situation. And I should also mention that now this is a discussion that has 2 perspectives. That's the short-term perspective and that's the long-term perspective. I would say the long-term perspective is relatively easy because, as you have said, it's more or less reiterating all things the new German government actually wanted to do. A fast increase in the build-out of renewables, electrification of the transport sector, of the building sector, all, of course, would help us to reduce dependencies on fossil fuels, including a strive for more efficiency in the German economy. So the long-term perspective, I think that's totally undisputed. And of course, it's only a matter of time that many of these adjustments will not come not quickly enough to be really helpful for these problems that we are going to face in the next 2 winters. And the discussion here is that indeed we need we need policies that also make some compromises in the short run. And you have already outlined some of them. Mainly gas is used in the heating sector and in industry, but as well in the electricity sector. And the electricity part will be the easiest to substitute potentially, given that we can use more coal, we can use even oil for producing electricity in our economy. The other things are going to be more difficult, but even that, of course, will be a compromise because, as you know, we have decided on a coal phase out. You were mentioning nuclear. So my personal view is we don't need to extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants, given that this will also pose a lot of regulatory problems in the short run. It's clear that there will be running without any legal basis and nobody is going to take these risks. But what we can do is we can slow down our coal phase out. In Germany, we have about 6 gigawatts of coal power plants that are scheduled for leaving the market in 2022. And for me, I think that is a relatively easy way to cope with the situation on the electricity market. So these plants are not going to leave. This is about half is lignite power plants. The other half is hard coal. They are going to stay in the system, potentially as reserves. But the situation, let's say, on the electricity market, I talked as well with some of the regulators. At the moment is, of course, still unclear, but probably easier to handle. The other problem is, of course, then the role of the households and the industry. And there, we just published a study yesterday with a group of German macroeconomists, where we actually made the point that this large reductions in gas for industry might lead to substantial negative consequences for some of the German industry, especially the energy-intensive industry. And there we are going to see also large reductions in production. But if you look at the broader picture, you might see that there are a lot of opportunities still to be flexible and to adjust to this new situation. And our overall GDP shock assessment of cutting ties to Russia was around 3%, given all these flexibilities that we have usually embedded in the short-term macroeconomic models. Now that leaves us, besides the pain for the heavy industry, that leaves us with the households. And there we already heard that, of course, households are last in line when we think about cutting gas supplies. But of course, they provide a relatively quick possibility to reduce as well gas demand. And so this will be something where I think also the German government is going to try to incentivize reductions in the building sector and heating with the households in order to soften a bit the impacts on the industry. So to sum up, now we think that we need all the different levers in order to cope with the situation. It will need supply side flexibility. We will have to look for more LNG. We will have to look for gas from Norway, from the Netherlands, possibly from the UK, from North Africa. We will have to fill up our storage sites. And there is a law also in Germany that foresees 90% of storage in December as mandatory for storage providers, which is a lot, which would soften 3 months of winters in Germany. And we have to think about what are the opportunities on the demand side that I just outlined. I think, as I said, we are unsure how this is going to play out. and what it will mean in the end. And of course, policy makers have to make these decisions. It's not up to scientists to make these decisions. But we think that this will be a dramatic decision, but one that can be taken if we are aware of the consequences in the broader picture. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for mentioning the study. We'll put that one on our webpage, and obviously also the study that Brian Vad mentioned earlier, that everybody can read up on these things afterwards. And I think it was also very important that you mentioned that, yes, there is a debate about phasing out nuclear energy, but it's also important to remember, obviously, that Germany has a decision to phase out coal. Idealerweise, as far as I remember. When was it again, Andreas? It was supposed to
2030.
be... Yeah, right.
And this is not compromised. 2030 is still 8 years to go.
Okay. But I think we'll probably get back to that as well. And I'm also dying to hear whether anything has changed with regards to how Germany will then be able to have all these renewables. Bavaria, last time I was there, I did not see any wind turbines, so there's plenty of space there, but how on earth do you then get the support for that? And maybe there's also some change with regards to legislation around the corner. But I'll get back to you on that one, because before we open up for questions, and remember that you can already now put them in writing in English, then I'll look into them as we go along. But before we get to the debate or discussion, we go to Rome. We go to Italy, yes, where we have Arturo Vavelli, head of the Rome office of the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR. We have invited you because Italy is obviously also a country. It's very vulnerable if one looks upon the present situation with regards to energy. But we also invited you because one could argue that Italy has been, if not in the same situation, exactly the same situation, but in a similar situation with the war in Libya, because there Italy had very quickly to substitute a very large percentage of its energy. So I think there may be this sort of interesting angle to your intervention. Otherwise, I'll ask you afterwards. Basically, what are the lessons learned? What did you do that was the right thing to do? But maybe there are also some things that Italy did at that time which you regret. At least personally, I've been sort of looking into the discussion about Qatar at the moment, which at least in this country, but basically all over, at least Europe, has been a big discussion about whether it would be possible to have a World Cup in Qatar and whether one should have a political boycott of Qatar. But now I see that Qatar is very high up on the list where we want to import our energy, and I just saw that the Austrian Chancellor Nehammer was down there visiting the Emir 2 days ago. So there is also a question, when we sort of change our dependence on energy, who do we then become dependent upon? I think that's also a discussion that we should at a certain stage have. But over to you, Arturo, and thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thanks to everyone, and especially to you, Lieke, for inviting me to speak today. I would like to start by saying that I'm not an energy expert, but an analyst on the Italian foreign policy, especially in the Mediterranean. And this is why over the last 10 years, I have also been an observer of Italy's energy policy, because Italy, as is well known, as you mentioned, has a strong dependence on external sources. And Italy already experienced a rather critical phase 11 years ago, that of the Libyan crisis you mentioned. At that time, Italy imported about 30% of its oil from Libya and more than 15% of its gas. And at that time, Italy had to replace all that energy. Of course, oil is more replaceable than gas because it doesn't need infrastructure like gas. But it wasn't easy at all at the time. But there is another factor that constitutes an important constraint in our energy strategy, or better, dependence. And that is, for my side, the renunciation of the nuclear energy after a popular referendum in the 80s following the Chernobyl accident. And Italy was in fact, together with France and with other European countries, quite developed in this sector. But we decide to leave the nuclear sector energy. So from that moment, in fact, Italy was always been forced to look at its international relation with this kind of constraints, finding sources of energy. So last week, speaking at the Italian Parliament, for example, about the Ukrainian crisis, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi made explicit accusations against the previous governments, because he said the events of these days demonstrate the imprudence of not having diversified more our energy sources and our suppliers in recent decades. These are the words of Mario Draghi. And as you can see from the first graph, so please, if we see this one, perfect, thank you. Sorry, it's in Italian, but I think it's easy to understand. Italy is heavily dependent on hydrocarbons in its energy mix, because Italy depends on natural gas for more than 40% of its needs. The rest is mainly distributed between renewable sources and oil. And Rome has reduced national gas production in the last 20 years from 17 billion cubic meters per year in 2000 to around 3 billion cubic meter in 2020. So while the national consumption has remained constant, this is quite crazy. Italy clearly needs to move quickly on the diversification front to overcome vulnerability as soon as possible and to avoid the risk of crisis as we are living. And due to this dependency, Italy is potentially among the countries most exposed to the sanction on energy that EU will impose on Moscow and to eventual Russian retaliation. If we look at the second slide, so please. Okay, perfect. More than 40% of the Italian gas demand depends on Russia, and up from 10 years ago. So this growth of Russian gas was also linked to the instability in Libya. So Russia and Libya are two main suppliers of natural gas for Italy. In the short term, replace the Russian gas is very, very difficult, as my two colleagues explain better than me. There are several ways for Italy. More national production, but this could be a little amount to respect the total. LNG, liquefied natural gas, but Italy has few regasifiers. Few regasification plants, only 3 regasification plants. The third hypothesis is increase imports from Azerbaijan and Algeria. And not surprising, few days ago, the Foreign Minister Di Maio and the president of Eni, our oil giant, Claudio Descalzi, were in Algiers precisely to try to increase supplies from Algeria. But perhaps the best things would be to increase the connection between, for example, the Spanish and European networks, because Spain has many regasification facilities. If you want to have more GNL, we have to build more connection between us. And this would require an European strategy, a big European strategy on this. So it's not a case that Italy launched the idea, for example, of a common European storage system, and yesterday this was approved by the European Union. In this case, I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think a fiscal stimuli or something similar must be created to incentivize companies to large storage, because unlike vessels, gas is not bought by the states and redistributed by them, but private companies manage these activities. So we have to incentivize the private companies. In some way, the states are participating in the capital of these companies, but we need to incentivize them to do it. So Italy is very cons with finding alternative resources at the moment, and this must happen within the green transition that EU is pushing. There are some very important for me, declaration of the Minister of Ecological Transition, Roberto Cingolani, that is an expert on energy. He said that in 24-30 months, we, as Italy, we should be independent of Russian gas, accelerating a lot on renewables in the short term, strengthening, for example, our ability to regasify, and also you try to using other sources as synthetic fuels, biomethane, hydrogen, and also sure energy saving, energy efficiency. I'm concluding. Giving the premises of Italy's dependence, I think a miracle is taking place, because Italy is realizing that it must free itself from energy dependence. And neither the energy shock in the 70s, and neither the Libyan crisis help this kind of new strategy for Italy. And this must be done very quickly, but it's unthinkable that the tap will be turned off tomorrow morning. In a few months, half of the flow can be closed. We need around a year for a total closure. This is the position of the Italian government. Then there is a final consideration. For example, Algeria, Azerbaijan, and Libya as a potential substitute supplier. They may be temporary supplier, but we cannot count on them in the long run, making the same mistake, relying on autocracies or countries potentially in crisis. So in short, it is a very difficult way. It's a winding road, because we cannot be without gas next winter, but neither can we think of investing in large infrastructure when we know that dependence on gas is destined to gradually decrease. In any case, sanction involve gas or not, we have to replace the Russian gas in our energy mix as soon as possible. So thank you very much. I'm open for your suggestion, intervention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Arturo, and also for making the case that in order to understand what's going on with regards to energy policy, you have to be a foreign policy expert as well. I think you made that point very clear. And also for highlighting sort of that this is actually a miracle, although it's a very tragic situation that we're in, but this will have sort of major long-term repercussions for Italy's energy policy, and hence also for Italy's role in Europe and also its global policy. I think that was also a very important point. I already have a number of questions up here, but I'll obviously use the prerogative as for being the chair of asking the first one myself, because I'm interested in knowing, I mean, when you saw the proposal, and this question is for the three of you, when you saw the proposal from the Commission yesterday, two questions there. What was the most surprising aspect of that plan for you? And secondly, where do you see sort of the major obstacles, also if one sort of tries to look into the crystal ball just for the summit that's happening tomorrow and the day after? Where do you see that there'll be real sort of tension between countries on agreeing upon the first sort of part of this overall plan? Obviously, one will have to agree on the details afterwards, but what I'm talking about is the overall goal and the various aspects that'll be highlighted in the Council conclusions from the summit that will start tomorrow in Versailles. So what was the most surprising aspects of the plan? And secondly, where do you see the major obstacles? who would like to start? Brian is ready. But we are in Germany, so let's go with Germany. So Andreas, what's your take on it?
Okay, so I think the one thing that is for me really important is that we understand that the efforts that we need right now are actually European efforts, and that has many dimensions. One dimension we already talked a bit about is what about LNG, and we know that in order to fill up our storages, we will need European efforts to bring this about, and really think about how we can use the European networks in order to cope with the issues. I think that is for me one of the big takeaways. And then the other one, of course, is the role of households and how much they are going to reduce gas demand. That's interesting for Germany, because in the German case, households are practically sheltered from demand reductions, because in case of physical shortages, they are not going to be really cut off. And on the other hand, we have a situation in Germany where the customers, they pay actually their gas bills in the following year, which means that a lot of the cost consequences of their behavior is actually not going to play out, because they don't see these changes in the costs of gas, for example. And so my question was, to what extent can we actually really pull this trigger? Is that really something that we can incentivize? And especially given the fact that there's a lot of talk about reducing gas use. Here in Germany, the people all say freezing for Ukraine. Whether this is really going to be happening in reality.
And where do you see the major obstacles?
Yeah, exactly the same things. I mean, can we coordinate? Can we come together? Don't we have, let's say, a rat race on LNG supplies, for example, where every government is going out and trying to buy and fill up its storages, which we already see to some extent now. I mean, German minister already tries to secure LNG, of course. But we know that, of course, the number of open contracts, for example, is limited. So we are all fishing in the same pond. And can we harmonize this? What would happen if, for example, really the energy supply is breaking down? Can we rely on electricity flows, on gas flows, within Europe, and how can we assure this? So I think these are really crucial questions that have to be answered on the European level.
So that's a huge test for European solidarity. I mean, if somebody is freezing, will you help your neighbor? That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. That was maybe the cue for you, Atul, or where were the major surprises for you, and where do you see the major obstacles?
Yeah, I think that I'm very surprised at the rapid response from Europe, and that energy. I think that the main surprise is how Europe reply very, very, very rapidly to this situation, and that energy too can be shared in some way. On the other hand, if we remember, Europe was formed at the beginning to share coal and steel. So this is the most surprising element. Each country is not alone in this crisis, but a mechanism of solidarity was immediately triggered. The thing that worries me the biggest obstacle is the cost of this situation. I'm totally agree. Yesterday's plan includes a common price of energy, but it is clear that this measure must be economically available. Energy prices are very, very high in Italy, with many companies already suffering, and this situation can have consequences on the recovery plan, on our economy, etc. So, and this is the main preoccupation for Europe, but in particular for Italy.
And that's why also you can already now see that there's debate about, whether there should be a recovery fund number 2, basically. The first one was due to the COVID crisis, and then there's debate whether we need one now due to this crisis with regards to energy.
It's totally interlinked with the economic situation.
Exactly, and that's again also part of the debate tomorrow, starting with the summit. Brian, what was the major surprise, and where do you see the obstacles?
I think one of the major surprises was the level that the Commission thinks we're able to withdraw from natural gas in a rather short time. Without talking about shutting down. And I think it's somewhat in all of the darkness a bit comforting that they think we can reach that far. I think it's extremely ambitious, but I was surprised about that. I'm not so surprised about the action and the urgency this is being treated with. I think one of the learnings we have from the COVID crisis is that we are able to take measures and make decisions, and I think COVID connected Europe and made us work together. I think actually what we're seeing here is that we learned it's good to work on a joint problem with common solutions, and also what I see is a sort of a disruption from previous years. Much better than me, Løkke, about European history, but I think Europe started on a collaboration on coal and steel and an internal market, and I think we remember the internal market for many years, but we forgot about self-sufficiency, and I think this is what we're really seeing and remembering now, and I think the policy measures here are extremely important. The major obstacles for Europe is really the heating sector. I think that we can actually, in a rather short time, do quite a lot with energy savings, many low-hanging fruits. We can do quite a lot with industry. With one industry, we save as much energy as maybe 500 houses. But because we have millions and millions of houses connected and depending on natural gas for low temperature water, that is going to create a major obstacle. I made an assessment in the note I talked about before that by within 5 to 8 years we can reduce the gas dependency by 30%. And that is about what we import from Russia. But that is then not making a fuel shift, because we can of course make a fuel shift on top of that. But I think the heating sector is really what is hard. And I have previously made a roadmap for heating, and one of the suggestions that we made in a project called Heat Roadmap Europe was that we should establish a foundation, an economic foundation, to establish new district heating grids in Europe. It's very boring. But we have waste heat enough in Europe to heat almost all of our houses, and if we start these grids, they won't have a major effect within 5 years, but they will have a major effect in 15 years. And I think we have to make that kind of infrastructure. And we talked about 8,700 new grids by 2030. Maybe we should have that by 2028 instead.
Yeah, that goes back to Turu's point about costs. That will not be cheap, I presume. That'll be a major investment that you'll have to pursue there. If we now move to the questions. I mean, we have a number of questions dealing with sort of the acute sort of phase of this, using Brian's point. There's a question for you, Brian, whether there's a real risk that gas supply in Denmark is going to shut down. And then I see a question to you, Andreas. So the nuclear plants, I mean, there's a huge debate in Denmark about the German nuclear plants. Could they play a role sort of in the acute phase? And I just saw yesterday that Robert Habeck, the new minister, and also the new minister of environment, came out saying, as far as I could see, that they were very doubtful with regards to the security situation. There were risks connected to the German plants. So I think that would be important also for the Danish audience to understand what was that about, basically. And to Arturo, there's also the question, I mean, the risk for Italy of running out of gas, and what kind of sort of measures can one sort of pursue in order then to limit the situation. So Andrea, should we start with you? The nuclear plant. Sorry to keep on pestering you about this, but it is plays a role in the Danish debate also.
Yeah, the German Minister of Economic Affairs and the German Minister of Environment have published a text yesterday dealing with the issue of nuclear phase-out, and they made it relatively clear that this is not an option from their point of view. And they made a number of different arguments. And I think the most important one was the one on security issues. So actually all the nuclear power plants, they had, of course, this closure date in mind when setting up all their revision schedules and so on and so forth. So all their licenses and everything is going to be revoked by end of the year, which means that they would have to do all these security measures and the revisions before continuing. Otherwise, as I said, I mean, they would work without a solid legal frame, which could be contested, and it will be contested, of course, in Germany. And so I think this will be really a problem. Of course, you could buy out potentially the operators. I mean, each power plant made a profit of 500 million last year. Now with the new electricity prices, I guess we will talk probably more about 2 billion or so. Probably you might be willing to take the risk. I don't know, but I think that's highly unlikely. And then there are other arguments too, including the Iranian supply. So, for example, this has to be tailored to the nuclear power plant, I learned. So it's really a long-term process to get the Iranian for the power plants, and therefore, I mean, the bottom line is they think that it will need at least half a year to start the nuclear power plants again, which means they would more or less not be usable for the next winter. And then you would have to run them, of course, for some time, because otherwise it would be also very, very costly. And that means then you would have to run them probably 3 to 5 years, which would, of course, totally destroy the phase out. And as you have these other opportunities, that is the coal power plants, that is, of course, the much easier choice, including, of course, the EU emissions trading system, which as of course you know, this would just mean that we are front-loading emissions of coal power plants, which would mean that we would have to reduce quicker later on.
Thank you very much for being so clear on that question also. Arturo, the acute phase, we are still in the acute phase, so to speak. How do we stay warm this winter?
No, it's very difficult to imagine the next winter. I think that Italy does not have many gas terminals, and this is one of the main preoccupation of Italy, because with more GNL probably Italy and Europe should be more safe. While supplies via gas pipelines from the south are also very limited due to instability in Libya, due to limited production in Algeria, for example. And in short term, the question is the substitution of the Russian gas. I think the solution is a mix between increasing of gas supply from this country, from Algeria, Azerbaijan, and also Qatar. We can count on Libya due to political instability. And let me tell you about a missed opportunity, I think, because if we look at the opportunity of building the East Med gas pipelines, a project that would bring gas from the Eastern Mediterranean to Italy. This was a competing project with the Nord Stream 2. No? For me, it was a missed opportunity. No? We would have had an extra pipeline bringing gas to Europe. But the project was stopped for two or three reasons. One is the competing project with the Nord Stream. The second was the lower prices that not permit to be very advantage this project. And the third was the relation between not good relation between Egypt and Turkey. But I think that the geopolitical problems, we can solve these kind of problems. But now is too late. Probably it's too late to build another project to have this opportunity, and so we will try to survive in some way. I'm totally agree, because the problem will be probably the next winter.
Andreas, did you want to come in on this? Yes?
Yeah, I would just add something which concerns LNG terminals, because that was raised. No, and I should add, German government had decided to build 2 new LNG terminals, one in Brunsbüttel and one in Wilhelmshaven. Actually, the Brunsbüttel one is taken over 50% by the German government.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting, because the industry says they can build it in 9 months. Of course, the projected time is more like 3 years. So we will see. Now, government has taken over these LNG plant, 50% from the state bank, KfW. And this is, I think, a very interesting development as well, because Germany traditionally had no LNG terminal.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's also interesting that it's been taken over by the government. Whatever happened to the Schuldenbremse, but I think that'll be another sort of seminar. Brian, you can answer many questions at the same time. I know you that's possible for you, because there's also another question. There's the acute phase, and then there is also a question basically dealing with Denmark's gas production from the North Sea. I mean, we used to be a big sort of producer of regards to gas and oil, so can we do something there? There's something about the Tyra field.
Yeah, look, well, I think I'm just trying also to connect to the Italian situation there. The situation we're in now is we need to deal with the immediate acute situation, but we also need to deal now with what should happen in 3 years, what should happen in 5 years, and prepare for that massive rollout of renewables across Europe, energy efficiency, etc. But I would heavily warn against something. Would heavily warn against when we do a fuel shift to coal and oil. Those prices are going to go up, but we are also in a situation we don't want to be stuck with these things. We want to be sure that we don't make contracts that we can't break, that we're not too long term. And this is really a key thing also to understand with infrastructure for gas. And we heard about Italy, there was a missed opportunity. Maybe it's good there was a missed opportunity. Now we're forced into other solutions. And those solutions, we have to remember our climate goals. I would argue that we should try to do what Scholz also said, build LNG terminals. There's some that are afraid that then we're stuck with those. But the thing is, that's going to be expensive gas. And expensive gas is not as much as a problem as cheap gas when we look at the climate. And we're not so much stuck with having to use an infrastructure. It's a cheaper sort of infrastructure to have. And that can maybe just bring me into the Danish debate. We have in Denmark a natural gas oil field, the biggest one in operation that is shut down. It's an operation. It's actually going to make us a net exporter from the summer of next year. And then in the Danish debate, we're talking about, so how much does that mean for Europe that we're net exporting? It means maybe below 0.5%. So it's very, very little. It's really not very important. We also have a gas field that's been abandoned, so to say, or oil and gas field. It's called the Sana field, and we can actually make that probably into operation within 5 years. The problem is, what would that mean for Europe? It may mean up to 3 months of a year's natural gas consumption and that's the whole resource. So just to put this into proportion, we're going to be able to export from next year 2.5% of the natural gas demand in Europe. So if we really want to do something about natural gas, we need to replace natural gas with renewables. That's a real solution. Of course, there are many small parts, but to expand from the Danish part of the North Sea, the extraction is really not going to help and do any sort of changes to this.
So basically what you're saying is, and that was also Andreas's point, that there are no silver bullets out there, miracle solutions, although you see many of them. I was alluding to that on social media at the moment. But you mentioned renewables, and you also mentioned doing the right thing, reminding us all that there's still something called climate change, global warming and so forth, which leads me into Jakob's question here, which is basically about renewables. If we sort of short-term basis want to speed up the installation of renewables, what are the most important steps that we should take in Denmark, Germany, Italy, and also in Europe? And there I take the liberty of going back to you, Andreas. Will you change not you personally, but will the law be changed in Germany with regards to the ability then to have more wind turbines, for instance? Are there any changes there?
Yes, I mean, I understand Brian's worry, about whether we are leaving the right track, for short-term solutions. I'm relatively optimistic that this is not going to happen in Germany, because now we have a green minister of economic affairs and climate change. So this is a major change, of course, in the German government. So now, for the first time, we have the economics and the climate change issues in one house, which is changing a lot. And already now the minister made clear that the build out of renewables, and this is when the crisis was not so imminent as it is today. The build out of renewables will be his primary goal. And he has, for example, shown a new target for photovoltaic build out, currently 50 gigawatt of photovoltaic in Germany to 200 gigawatt in 2030. So you can see how ambitious that is. So we are talking about 20 gigawatt per year, something that has never happened in Germany before. And now the question, of course, is how can we do that? And the main obstacles are no longer economic, because with these energy prices, of course, I mean, economically, this is all very solid. The obstacles, as you already highlighted, are the availability of space for new developments, and especially the length and the complexity of administrative processes in bringing online new renewable plants. And we are going to see a new legislation in Germany on renewables in Eastern. So this is called the Easter package that will be published, and this will be almost exclusively about how we can get rid of red tape, of administrative burdens in the build out of renewables. And this will be the focus. And then, of course, it will take a bit until this is going to be materializing, but they take this very serious. So this will be the prime goal of the government, not only PV, but PV is the most visible one, also onshore wind and also offshore wind. And of course, they already had several talks with the German Länder, and they want to implement a 2% rule on space reserved for renewables in all the German Länder.
Excellent. So there'll be a very special Osterhase arriving in Germany, not with the Easter eggs, but with sort of legislation to cut red tape. Almost sort of run out of time here, but I know what Brian will say, because you mentioned that one of the major sort of obstacles here was basically manpower. So I'll give the final 2 minutes to Italy, to you, Arturo.
Thank you, Lieke. Very, very brief. In the long run, the Italian strategy is aiming at promoting the green transition as quick as possible, especially after the Ukrainian crisis. So Rome, we have to remember, is the large recipient of funds from the European Recovery Plan, 200 billion, and almost half of which is destined for projects relating to the European Green Deal. So renewables will be central. I regret how slow Italy has been in the past, both on the diversification of sources and on green energy in general. I think too slow. These issues have only recently entered, for example, in the public debate. There has been little understanding of how these topics are key issue for our well-being, for our economy, etc. So now the population will take notice. I would like to add something about national gas production and regasificators. The main opponents of this policy in recent years have been the populist parties, politically close to Russia and China. I would not like to find out in the coming months that these parties have also reacted to explicit requests from these countries. But I think it is possible. In fact, these political parties have fostered our dependence on Russia. And now we are realizing.
Goodness, yeah, that was an interesting point there as well at the end here. Thank you very much. I mean, that was splendid. Thank you very much to Andreas, to Brian, to Arturo. Thank you to Insurance and Pension Denmark for hosting us. We'll put all the various studies that were mentioned on our webpage. We'll also put this on our social media channel. Thank you so much also for doing this, and also for giving us a crash course, not only on what happened yesterday with the Commission's proposal, but what will also happen with the summit in Versailles. But as you also mentioned, we should also already now look upon the short term, but also the longer term. So thank you very much, and we'll have many other events coming up, so also check our web pages for that, and do also look for the German Osterhase with the new legislation coming up there. Thank you very much, and have a nice day despite all the tragedy happening around us.